Tensions are escalating between Russia and Ukraine after Kyiv claims to have struck more than 40 Russian warplanes in a massive drone offensive. The Security Service of Ukraine says it carried out a large-scale special operation targeting bomber aircraft across multiple airfields. Dramatic footage purports to show drones striking Belaya Air Base in Irkutsk, a strategic site thousands of miles inside Siberia. Russia's Air Defense Ministry has not yet responded publicly to the claims. The drone strikes represent one of Ukraine's most far-reaching military actions yet, further raising stakes ahead of possible peace talks in Istanbul. Meanwhile, a Russian delegation heads to Turkey for direct talks with Ukraine. President Zelensky has indicated Kyiv will attend the meeting in Istanbul on Monday, but as diplomacy begins, drones continue to fly. Russia says enemy UAVs hit its Murmansk and Irkutsk regions, including the first reported strike on a military unit in Siberia. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian security official says Kyiv's SBU conducted strikes on Russian strategic bombers, though no responsibility has been formally claimed. The talks come amid escalating pressure on both sides to lower the temperature. Now we have Gilbert Doktorov. He's a Russian affairs expert, joining us live from Brussels, Belgium. Thank you for joining us today. What details are available about the recent drone strikes targeting Russian military air bases deep inside Siberia?
The Russians have not commented on this, so my usual sources of information are not yet saying a word. What is surprising, of course, is the distance. We're speaking about several thousand kilometers away from Ukraine. How they could have done this is difficult to understand, though we may assume that these drones were launched from within Russia. That is to say, that the Ukrainians had secretly brought them into Russian territory and fired them from within Russia. But that's a speculation. What is important, of course, is to note the use of drones. There's been so much discussion, international discussion, about the value to Ukraine of high technology Western missiles, particularly in recent days, the discussion of whether Germany will supply the 500-kilometer range Taurus missile to Ukraine. Well, 500 kilometers does not take you to Irkutsk. It doesn't take you much farther than the Crimea Bridge. So my point is that this is a fabricated issue, that the Ukrainians need Western missiles to attack Russian military assets. And the reality is that they have drones, which are probably Western supplied, and which probably are hitting their targets with the help of Western satellite reconnaissance information for flight paths, but not necessarily. And they are far more effective than the missiles that are being discussed today, which could unleash World War III if the Germans do provide them. That is the main lesson I see from what happened today. At the same time, this news that you've mentioned has overwhelmed the pre-existing news of the day, which has been the Ukrainian attacks on two railway lines within the Russian Federation, just across the border from Ukraine. That is, in Bryansk in particular. Bryansk is a province, a region of the Russian Federation, just to the north of Kursk, where they staged their invasion in August of 24, and which they had just been liberated a month or so ago by the Russians. So Bryansk is just to the north, to the west of Kursk. It borders on Belarus in the north and on Ukraine in the west. There was an explosion on an automobile bridge, which overflew a railway bridge, or railway line. The automobile bridge was blown up. Its debris fell on the train below and caused very serious harm. 71 people were seriously injured. Of them, 40 are in hospital and 7 died.
Yes.
That was one attack. A separate attack. These were hours apart in the night over this weekend. And the second attack was in fact in Kursk, where it was precisely a railway line which was struck and the train derailed. We don't have figures for casualties there. The Russians stated that this was a terror attack. The Ukrainians denied this, saying that this was slander and that we Ukrainians never do engage in terrorism. This is just a reason for the Russians to pull out of the negotiations for peace. Of course, the Ukrainians, who never engage in terrorism, blew up 2 Russian generals in Moscow in the last 6 to 8 months, and they financed and coordinated a terror attack by some Central Asian hirelings in a major entertainment center in the suburb of Moscow, which caused a number of deaths and enormous outrage. That was the Crocus Center. So the Ukrainians, led by Mr. Budanov, who is the responsible official for all of these terror attacks, have used terror, which terror is defined as attacks on civilians for the sake of creating chaos and panic. That is precisely what the Ukrainians have been doing, and it is quite hypocritical, but not to say outrageously lying, to deny that they were involved in these attacks in the neighboring regions of Kursk and Bryansk.
And we only have a minute left here, but how might recent military and sabotage these activities influence the prospects for peace between Ukraine and Russia?
Oh, they'll have no influence whatsoever. What the Ukrainians are hoping for will be a massive strike, an unreasonable attack by Russia, a revenge attack, which they then can hold up to the West and say, look what barbarians the Russians are, etc., etc. So this is provocative, it's intentionally provocative, hoping for a Russian overreaction. There won't be any overreaction. There will probably be some more deadly Russian strikes on military assets in Ukraine. And the negotiations will likely take place tomorrow. But I do not put much trust in these talks resulting in a peace treaty or in a truce, because the parties are so far apart in their objectives and what they expect the end game to look like. So the war will go on. The real question is, when will the United States impose new harsh sanctions on Russia with one hand and deny Ukraine further aid, military, financial, and intelligence, which would be to say, when will the United States leave the war and impose these 2 types of punishments on the warring parties, saying that that will help bring them to more moderation and peace.
Thank you. Thank you, Gilbert Doctorow, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next story. Iran has issued a